This title is really important to everything, really. You've called it the Russo-Ukrainian War. It's often called the Russian invasion into Ukraine. It's called the Russian war on Ukraine. Why specifically have you chosen to call it this title, the Russo-Ukrainian War?
The war at the current stage really started as a Russian invasion of Ukraine. And what Russians found in Ukraine was something that no one expected, either Russians or Americans or Europeans. There was a state and there was an army that fought back, not just people, not just territory, but the state as well. And the war that was imperial and colonial and was this really attack on former imperial colony turned out to be into the war between the two states, two armies. And that is what I wanted to reflect in the title of the book.
In terms of this war, this is the stage we're at, of course, at the moment. We've got Zelensky meeting world leaders. We've got a new sanction being announced. Let's talk about the sanction. Diamond imports. What sort of impact do you think that will have? How much impact are the sanctions that are already in place having? Do you think they're enough?
Coming here, I just checked Ukrainian news, and the latest is that Zelensky apparently will join the summit, but virtually online, which maybe suggests that the counteroffensive that everyone talks about may be coming sooner than we expected. In terms of sanctions, this is a very important part of the war, the very important part of the support that Ukraine gets from its allies in the West. I would say on par with the arm supplies, and they are important as well. Under the circumstances, the more sanctions, the better, because what happened in the past when Russia invaded Georgia back in 2008, took over the Crimea in 2014, there was very little in that in terms of the response on the sanctions level in particular. There were some sanctions, but they were limited. And my personal belief is that if we had that level of sanctions back in 2008 or in 2014, we would not have that horrible war today.
There is a real sense of that throughout your book, a sort of perceived frustration about what could have been done at all these opportunities, all these times through history. But we are where we are in 2023. Where Zelensky is, you understand it from Ukrainian sources that he is appearing virtually. The press here is reporting that he'll be there in person.
There was reporting about being in person, and then a few hours later there was a statement from the Ukrainian Security Council that he will be joining online. I just coming into the studio, I checked that is the headline. Again, story is developing. We'll see what will happen.
Well, exactly. We will find out, of course, in due course. In terms, I'm really interested to hear your thoughts about Narendra Modi and his presence at the G7. A great part of your book is about the importance of bringing in the countries that until now have remained neutral, if that. Do you feel optimism? He'll be listening. Do you think this will be the start of something we haven't seen from India?
I was in Hiroshima a few weeks ago, meeting with the governor of Hiroshima, and we discussed also the coming summit. And the Japanese were making very important efforts to bring to the table as many people from the region, I mean countries, representatives of the countries as possible. And of course, India and India's position in this current situation is extremely important. Formally, Russia has very few allies. Informally, we certainly have China with China's pro-Russian neutrality, and India was more or less in the same column, in the same category. For me, it seems to me it's extremely important to get India on the right side of history.
Just finally, I'm interested to hear your perspective more on back in Ukraine with the war in terms of how it's progressing. There's an expected Ukrainian counter-offensive. How do you think things will play out in the coming weeks, and how do you think Russia will react to that?
We don't know really. This is the war. war, of course, is full of surprises. But we also have now almost 1 year of Ukrainian successes, one after another, from the battle for Kyiv, then counteroffensive in Kharkiv region, in the south in Ukraine, Kherson. So it's quite reasonably to expect that this one will be successful. And if it is successful, what will happen is that Ukraine would regain most of its probably territory that was lost since the start of the latest stage in the war, since February of 2022. The big issue then would become Crimea. Crimea de facto would become an island in the sense that the supplies and line supplies that connect today's Russia with the Crimea would be cut off. So it is very important to see how these things will turn out. If the counteroffensive is not successful, we can face basically really a much longer period of hostilities, not even a frozen conflict. So this probably counteroffensive will not decide the fate of the war as a whole, but it is extremely important development.
And just finally, the Russian position, because we often hear that that Russia is better perhaps at defending, that they do have a positive record when it comes to defense.
They have a quite negative record when it comes to defense.
Well, there we go.
All this counteroffensive were the cases where they were retreating. Where they have a good record is that they managed to retreat over the course of the last year without really major encirclement, because Ukrainian counteroffensive, one of the goals was also to encircle and capture as many Russian soldiers and officers as possible, because Ukrainians lost a lot of people as POWs during the first weeks of the war. After the immediate surprise, so they need an exchange fund, so to say. The people captured Russian soldiers and officers that they could exchange for the Ukrainian ones.